So this is going to be my video essay for the stylistic project, and I'm going to cover a few things from alter theory, possibly colour theory, my chosen director, spectatorship theory, negative structure, and mise-en-scène, and overall how these will help my production and what extent do I agree with them. So the first one I'm going to go over is alter theory. So alter theory was produced in France in the late 1940s, and it was later dubbed by an American film critic, Andrew Saris, and what I'll do is I'll put all the original founders and the original people that came up with this on the screen, and you can just learn a bit more about them. But what is alter theory? So alter theory is the theory that a singular artist who controls all aspects of a film is basically the owner and the person that runs and just owns that film. So take away all the people that did the camera work, the lighting, that added music to it. You know, it's just the director's film, and what they say it makes their film. So for example, a Tim Burton film has a distinct style. The main character is almost very norm to society. So for example, Willy Wonka or The Nightmare Before Christmas with Jack Skellington. And also Tim Burton films, they have a very gothic feel. And he's also known for using actors over again. So for example, usually Johnny Depp. So does this make Tim Burton an auteur, or would the film be different if it was produced by someone else, or would it be the same? And that's really the theory behind alter theory, and it's hard to understand. And for me, I feel there's a mix, because a film could always be the same if it's done by someone else, and it could be done in the same style. But for example, Tim Burton films, we can always recognise them, and I think in a way alter theory that is, once you've built a presence in the film industry and you get a certain style like Tim Burton, then the audience can almost recognise a film that you've done every time. And so that's sort of my opinion behind alter theory, and I'd love to hear what your opinions are on alter theory. And so the next theory is spectatorship theory, and also known as reception theory. So this was done by Stuart Hall, and his reception theory is basically text, but for us it would be visual content, so film. So this can include lighting, costumes, colours, and all of that stuff. So it can be received in one of three ways. You can either be a dominant or preferred reader, a negated reader, or an opposite reader. So the audience decode what the producers put into the visual content, or otherwise known as text, where we all react differently from culture to our age and to what we're into and stuff like that. So the dominant reader will decode it in a way that the producer wants them to, where they share the same cultural views. So if a producer has produced something and they want you to feel happy, you will almost every time feel happy, and that makes you a dominant reader. A negated reader is someone that understands the meaning and the way the producer's done things, but they have to adapt them to fit in with their own beliefs. So if you believe in something but a film is producing it as something else, then you might have to slightly adapt it into your own beliefs. And then a opposite reader is someone that completely rejects the producer's view and message, despite understanding some of the meaning and the messages convey can be really disturbing for them. So as we watch films, we all experience different emotions, from fear, pleasure, desire, surprise, shock, and a whole array of emotions, but not everyone experiences these equally to others, and not even at the same moments in the film. So someone could react to something a few seconds before you even begin to react to it. And so the question behind that is, what determines the way that us as individuals respond to a particular emotion to a film? So there's always intense interaction with us, with the sounds and the images occurring as we watch films, and that filmmakers are deliberately setting out to create emotional responses. And that's what you do when you create a film. You make it because you want to create emotion to the audience, and you want to convey that through your film. And so to this, the story afflicts emotion on the people as much as any other film can. So from the story to the actors to the costumes and colours and the style of the image and the sounds, everything creates emotion within a film, but understanding how to do it successfully is why something like spectreship theory is here. So for example, if we took the Joker, he always has greasy hair, and this usually to us is dirty, unwashed, unclean, and can indicate bad. And for example, his eyes and his mask, they're always hidden, so this clearly indicates that he's a bad guy. And the way that he just acts overall, he has a bad sense to him, and just the things that he does always inflicts a bad opinion onto us and inflicts that back onto him as a bad person. So that makes you a dominant reader because you understand what the producer has set out to do. Whereas something like video games, for example, so for GTA, for example, if you've never really heard of the game, but say you have a child that's really into it, but you know it's really violent, and you know it has drugs and it has all these bad parts of life into it, but you just completely disagree with the whole concept of it, yet whereas someone else could really enjoy playing the game, and you know they find the fun aspects to it, even though they understand that parts of it can be bad. But if you completely disagree with it, that makes you a opposite reader. So hopefully that makes sense of spectreship theory. The next is genre theory. So this ties in pretty well with the spectreship theory, and I'll put on the screen who this was founded by and created by, but it's based around the settings and the themes of a film and how these create a genre. So for example, genre is defined by mainly two things: how much it conforms to its genre's individual conventions and stereotypes. So a film must match the genre's conventions to be identified a part of that genre. So if it had zombies in it, then we instantly know it's a zombie film. Or if, for example, we take Star Wars, then we know it's a space film because it has a space setting, and that makes it a sci-fi film. Next would be how much a film subverts the genre's conventions to and its stereotypes. So the film must subvert convention enough to be considered unique and not just a clone of an existing film. So, you know, you can easily indicate if something's been inspired or if it's just been copied from a film. And so, for example, if we took a sci-fi film from 50 years ago, then the chances are it wouldn't look like a sci-fi film today, in our time right now. It would look completely different, and there would be a mixture of different genres all come into one. And so, for example, that's why films are usually classed under, you know, drama, comedy, and all of that type of stuff. You know, you can have a mixture of genres in there and not just based around one single genre. So next is narrative structure. Narrative form is structure through which movies tell stories. The way that we speak or go into the movies, we almost always mean that we are going to see a narrative film, a film that tells a story. So narrative structure always appears throughout media and society. It appears in novels, plays, comic books and television, shows, and even commercials. And they always appear in basic type films from documentaries, animated film, experimental, just really any type of film. It has a narrative structure to it. And the basic idea of a narrative structure is the string of events occurring in space and time, basically, and the way events happen that create logic and cause and effects ties together. And this also takes in part with the character traits, so from goals to the obstacles and the actions that they take out. So a film will always use different characters to tell a story, and their traits, like I said, always take a huge effect into this. So that could be attitude, skills, habits, tastes, and just anything really, something that drives them. And there's always a lot of other qualities that make a character who they are. And from this it builds a story from where it starts to build and end, and so this follows a few simple narrative structures, patterns and paths. So we always have it from where it starts to be happy, and then a problem always comes along. Everyone usually realizes the problem and its chaos that it's causing, and then each character will attempt to repair and damage and restore the problem. and then finally the problem is usually restored and the normal society can resume again, and then it will come to the end. So there's always a happy start, a problem, and then an end. And that's always been, in most films, the case of how the story goes. There's never really anything different to a story. And through this, the different ways that the characters act and the way that each scene is different has an impact on the narrative structure. So next would be mise en scène. Mise en scène is a French term to describe what is put in the frame of a shot. So there's usually always 5 elements to mise en scène. So from settings and props, costume, hair and makeup, facial expressions and body language, lighting and colour, positioning of character objects within the frame, and all of these have a real effect on the way we view a film or an image or just anything really. So for example, these settings can either be locations or they can be film sets built from scratch. So they, for example, these are to raise expectations to an audience and what could happen. So if we took a desert, then we can instantly adapt that with cowboys or camels or anything really that would be in a desert. Or if we took a jungle, then we could adapt it with bears or monkeys or something like that. And the setting will always indicate a element of what's happened in the shot. So the next would be costume, hair and makeup. These always create the character, giving us what time, society and culture the film is in. So if it was a film that had the society of and the culture of an 80s style, then we would instantly know because of the way the hair, the makeup and the costumes are on the character. Whereas we wanted to make a bit more modern, then we would instantly recognise that by the modern clothing that would be similar to what we wear today. Next would be facial expressions and body language, and these give a clear indication of how the character feels, and this is always usually contrasted with music as well. And so, for example, someone could look happy and we would always assume they are happy, but if you conflict that image with scary music, then maybe they're not happy, they're actually scared or they're really scary. And these always create expressions and create feelings that relate back onto us, the audience. So positionings to frame is next, and that can draw characters or objects into frame, applying and taking our attention. So, and it can also show the relationship between people. So if someone's really close to someone, then we could assume that they're either together or they're family related. And whereas if someone was stood really far away from someone, then we could take that as them not being very close and they're just complete strangers. The next thing would be lighting and colours. This can give a certain look, feel and mood. So for example, if we took red, it instantly indicates danger or possibly passion. Or if we took yellow, that could indicate happiness, and in some cases it could also indicate love, but it usually indicates happiness. So for example, if we took a tree, if we made it really dark, it could look really threatening. But if we added colour and we added children playing underneath it, it becomes happy. So that's just a basic example of how mise en scène works. So that will be the end of my theory. I will also put on the end of this the certain director that I've picked and the content that they've done, so you can go and check them out. And this is my video essay for the stylistic challenge, and I hope I can take all of these aspects onto board and how directors use certain characters and certain clothing and just lighting and everything onto my film, and how I can make it a lot better of a production.